What's up, guys? This is Anthony from Wings from Underground. I'm gonna do a video today about Prashanth Iyer's article from the Winged Wheel podcast called If I Were Steve Yzerman Part 3. He goes through what he would do in the draft, some of the analytics he creates and used based off of some other hockey analyst rankings. There's a bunch that we'll go through, but first we'll check out Prashanth's Twitter page just to give you an idea of who he is. He's a Red Wings fan. I don't know much about him. He's got 14.7k followers. That's pretty good. He used to do a podcast with Max Boltman called Wings for Breakfast, which was my favorite Red Wings podcast. I don't listen to any of them anymore because now they're, I don't know, positive way to put a spin on that they're kind of all soupy. You get a little bit of the same flavor from all of them, but with Prashanth, he's clearly has some background in programming and data analysis, and he's created a model called GSVA, I believe, which we'll get into later, that helps you figure out what kind of trades can be made in the draft based off of the value of a player, and like the likelihood of them being made. So yeah, Prashanth Iyer wrote this article and was featured on the Winged Wheel podcast. They have 14.3k followers. Yeah, check it out if you're interested. Any support for the Red Wings is awesome. There's a bunch of other ones out there. All right, so let's check out the article. So this is part 3. I'm not going to do the first 2 parts. I didn't read them. He said that he laid out where the team currently is, and now I want to talk about the draft that's going to happen in 3rd and 4th. Okay, so he says that scouts have a better job identifying elite defensemen than they do forwards, and then he goes on to say that the difference between 1 and 4 and 4 in the rest of the draft is pretty big. So 1 and 4 are pretty much the guarantees, and he has a graphic that kind of shows how this works out. So he calls it game score value added over first 7 seasons. Okay, we'll get into that eventually. But okay, so let's see how his philosophy for the draft. Scouts seem to do a better job of identifying elite forwards compared to elite defensemen, although the gap appears to be closing significantly in recent years. Okay, so I had it backwards. They identify elite forwards like Craig Button and some other of those guys. He says, given that elite defensemen are extraordinarily difficult to acquire outside of the draft, you're not going to get a Moritz Seider via trade. It's very unlikely. The department will have a slight bias toward defensemen over forwards. Okay, so what he's basically saying is because the gap is bigger between defensemen and forwards in the draft, it's better to get your player early because you got to build a team around defensemen and goalie pretty much in centers, and if they're harder to get centers or defensemen more scarce commodity, it just makes more sense. Then he goes on to say elite goalies, the Red Wings got theirs, hopefully Sebastian Cossa, are difficult to identify at the time of the draft, which is probably why the Red Wings traded up or down depending on how you phrase that. They traded down with Dallas, I believe, from 18 to 16 to get Cossa. Wallstedt went to the Wild. I think Holland wanted Cossa, didn't have him available, so he ended up drafting a center. Goes on to say, drafting for need on the current roster is overemphasized, as a majority of players outside of the first round will take 3 to 5 years before cracking the NHL. So he's basically saying you want to take the players that are ready, not the players that you think will be the best fit, because that, even if they are a good fit, it might take a while for them to be that. Okay, so then he says, this is what I was getting to. The value of a draft pick drops off dramatically after the 4th pick. There's an Athletic article that goes into this. I don't have my subscription logged in, so I can't look into it. This is a visual, by the way, from Don Lucian. Don't know how to pronounce that. He said, no scouting staff has consistently separated itself as head and shoulders better at identifying the best player available at a given draft slot. Okay, so let's take the year before last year, Lucas Raymond's draft year. Lafreniere went first, Byfield went second, Stützle went third, Raymond went fourth. I think Sanderson went fifth and then sixth. I don't remember, but Arguably, Raymond has been the best player out of all the top 4 so far. And then outside of that, like he's saying, it's kind of harder to project. It says on average, 50% of players selected in the draft will play at least one NHL game. There are 7 rounds, 31 picks a round, 32 now, I think, because of the Seattle expansion. While the best opportunity to land one of those, 100 players in the first round, having multiple later round picks. Okay, so again, because the likelihood of landing a solid prospect is going to be in between 1 and 4, your odds of having a player make it to the NHL significantly decrease after that. So you just want to have as many darts on the board as possible outside of 1 and 4. That's the philosophy. Red Wings are sitting at 8 this year. Okay, 2020 NHL draft rankings. I like how he does this. He doesn't look at Bob McKenzie's draft ranking because he does it based off of insider ranking. These other guys, Button, Cosentino, Elite Prospects, Tony Ferrari, they do it, I believe, based off of more analytics. And then he goes on to say, because of the pandemic, stripping away seasons and tournaments from these players in their draft minus 2 years, scouts had not had the same opportunity to view these players. So this is going to be another kind of draft that is not going to, we're not going to be so sure of how the players will be selected. The rankings might be out of order. They might not be as similar, all these 10 that he synthesizes. So he uses the rankings from the following, and he generates a consolidated draft ranking list. That's really cool. This is why I like Prashanth, because he can condense numbers and turn it into like a visualization like this. Like, look at what the hell does this say? Let's just look at it for a second before we read his explanation. He's got Shane Wright first, Cooley second, Jurov Slajkowski, that really big Slovakian center. People say he could go first. If you notice right here, there's a point that has him above Shane Wright. Probably unlikely. Wright's going to go to Montreal. David Juracek, Savoie, Joachim Kemmel, Brad Lambert at 8, which is where the Red Wings will be picking if they don't move up or down, which is something that he talks about. We'll read what he says about Brad Lambert. Okay, so he says, in the graphic above, the gold dot represents the average ranking for the players, and the blue dots are each of the individual rankings. If a player was not ranked in the ranking from an outlet, they were assigned the next draft slot for the purpose of calculating an average. What stands out from this graphic is that aside from the top 7 players listed here, it's anybody's guess. Okay, so what he's basically saying is the Red Wings don't have a shot at the top 7 players that all these analysts agree on. That makes the scenario for the Red Wings a trade up, trade down, or not sit there. He gives the argument for all of them. The one he kind of lands on is that they're not going to move anywhere. Let's remind ourselves why. Trading up. Given the set nature of the top 7 and the consolidated rankings, as we put it, there have been 2 teams ahead of Detroit that are rumored to be shopping their pick. New Jersey Devils, but that was before they knew they had the second pick, so who knows if that's going to happen. Ottawa Senators said something about maybe trading up. He goes on, whenever it comes to trading draft picks and prospects, the biggest challenge is placing everything on the same value scale so that it can be compared properly. In order to do this, Lucien and him created the NHL trade machine. This is so cool, which attempts to place draft picks, prospects, and active skaters on the same trade value. Okay, so this is probably the best part about this video. Let's see. Okay, addressing Ottawa's request for an impact player. Ties our hands a bit. Clearly, Sider, Raymond are untouchables. Larkin's untouchable, but there are some options. It leaves with Bertuzzi, Vrana, Hronik. Because Bertuzzi's the oldest, he goes with him, and he has 1 year left on the contract. That plays into it. He's the most palatable as he's the oldest, 1 year remaining on his contract, and it has most highly valued play style across the league. Obviously, we don't know his. Okay, he goes on to say the vaccination status. Assume that's going to be non-issue moving forward. The trade machine. What does it say? He's under contract for 1 more year. A team that parts with significant pieces for him would likely want to ensure that they have him for more than 1 year, but he's not eligible to sign before the draft ends. Unless Ottawa has a verbal agreement on an extension in place prior to the deal, the Wings will likely have to add pieces to the draft, making it unfavorable for the Red Wings. On the surface, he says that Red Wings would not pay this price to add the 7th overall pick. They would be trading down to get the 7th overall pick. And he says, again, he brings up the darts on the board. He believes having additional darts is better. Goes on, however, we believe that a trade constructed on a handshake agreement for an extension in Ottawa, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this isn't that interesting. Okay, this is the meat of the GSVA. That would be happening between Ottawa picking 7th and the Red Wings picking 8th. In order to land the 7th overall pick, Detroit would have to trade the 40th pick, the 52nd pick, and a player prospect worth approximately the 14th overall pick. Bertuzzi, without a contract extension, is valued at approximately the 28th overall pick. I don't know how that exactly works. It's pretty cool, but they figured that out. So again, the Wings would likely have to do more than the proposed trade. It's not looking great for the Red Wings, so that's probably not something he thinks is going to happen. Trading down. What about trading down? Setting aside situations like the Detroit Sebastian Cossa last year where they moved up to draft a specific player that was sliding. He brings up some teams that don't have a first-round pick, including Boston, Calgary, Carolina, Chicago, Colorado, Florida, Rangers, and Vegas. So maybe they're a team that they end up trading down for. He says ultimately he thinks Detroit's going to stay put unless a team makes an offer above Tolski's market value that's too good to pass off. This is the example he gives. It'd have to be a deal such as Columbus offering 12, 44, and a 2023 second. Most likely not going to happen. So the Red Wings are going to probably stay at 8, and here are some options that he has. Brad Lambert, Connor Geekie, Cutter Gauthier. Most of them are centers and wings. There's no right-handed D. They're all left-handed D shots. Okay, so examine the two groups of players, North American group and a European group. Okay. Which one does he start with? Starting with the North American players, he has Matechuk, Korchinski, Minutikov, Geekie, Nazar, and Gauthier. In that order, he says the 3 forwards each have the potential to play at the NHL level, but also have a significant question mark surrounding them. For Nazar, he's the most likely pick for the Red Wings at 8th. The only question is he's the size. He's not that big. Gauthier, there were early season questions about his playmaking ability. Okay. Geekie, there's questions of whether he has footsteps. Okay, so all these players, there's questions surrounding their overall play, but nevertheless, at 8, it seems like a pretty good pick, especially Nazar, who has all the tools to succeed. Again, it comes down to the size. Who knows if that really matters anymore? I mean, just look at Gaudreau, how he did last year. This year he had almost 100 points if he didn't. Among defensemen, he's most intrigued by Pavel Mintyukov's game. He led all first-year draft eligible defensemen in goals and points. He says he's a dynamic skater, presses offensively, constantly looking for opportunities, lead the breakout. Okay, so this is his order of North American skaters. Nazar, Gauthier, Mintyukov, Matechuk, Geekie, and Korchinski. Okay, now let's go to the European players. Marco Kasper. I remember watching this guy play as like a 16 or 15-year-old in the U18s. Very impressive. He's Austrian, I believe. He grew. He's like 6'1" now. He's a center. Right here. Kasper, Urov, Lambert, and Lekarimaki. Says the challenge with evaluating European prospects is because they have limited ice time. They're playing with men. Said Sider played 11 minutes per night, 5v5 in his draft year, which maybe was why the Red Wings were able to... Okay, they traded down to get him. Who am I kidding? Is probably why he wasn't going to be picked higher. Looks like he's the best player in that draft. The player that stands out the most to him is Marco Kasper. Says he has a good shot, great motor, plays solid north-south game that will endear himself to many NHL front offices. Okay, sounds great. Who knows if that translates to second overall center. Doesn't sound like it to me. It sounds like he could be a really solid 2A. I don't know. Is he better than Tavares? Do we think Tavares is still a 1B center? Probably not. Aside from Kasper, both Urov and Lambert have significant questions marks surrounding them despite their immense talent. Urov saw little time in the KHL. There's significant concerns about bringing KHL players over to America, because of what's going on in the world right now. Lambert, the biggest question. Once we're widely considered a can't-miss prospect in this draft, stock has fallen. Kind of like, what was that guy's name? Aturati. That guy was supposed to be really high, but he ended up going to the Islanders. Prospect in this draft has seen his stock fall dramatically as he moved from team to team in Liga without ever putting it all together. So that could be something interesting. Brad Lambert, supposed to be can't-miss draft pick, and now he's might have fallen right into the Steve Yzerman's clutches. And then there's Lakarimaki, seems to be a little more offensively gifted than Kasper, but doesn't attack the middle. Okay, so he's more used to the wider European ice sheet. Ultimately, he gives the list as Kasper, Lambert, Urov, and Lekarimaki. He combines the list, and he has North American European skaters. Frank Nazar tops the list. He's a center. Marco Kasper, center. Cutter Gauthier, center. So the top 4 picks are pretty much all centers. Nazar would most likely play on the wing because he's a little shorter. You can see the stats right here. Pretty impressive stats from Nazar and Gauthier in the USDP. Brad Lambert, really not that impressive, 10 points in 50 games. Let's look at the defensemen. Oh, geez. Mintyukov and Matechuk had quite a few points, and they're almost a point a game. Lekarimaki, 9 points in 26 SHL games. Again, he's young. He's playing in SHL. It's a men's league. His ultimate conclusion is they're going to pick Nazar at 8, so we'll see what happens. That concludes. I don't know who the Red Wings are going to pick. He's pretty much saying that you pick the best player available because most of the time prospects aren't even ready to crack the lineup for 3 to 5 years. Sider probably could have played last year, but because of COVID, he went to SHL, develop more. He only took 3 years. Raymond took 2 years. Edvinson's probably going to play in the lineup next year. Who knows what Soderblom's going to do, draft minus 3 years, but ultimately the Red Wings are going to be in need of a center. They're going to need someone to go right behind Larkin. I hope if they draft Nazar, he can play center, and if not, might be Casper. I hope they get a center, and if they do, that will give them more depth, and they'll be a lot more competitive going forward with a very tough division. Cheers.